One decision could have changed the religious map of Asia forever. Not because of a war, not because of a revolution, but because, for a brief moment in history, some of the most powerful men in Japan quietly entertained an idea so unexpected that even many historians barely mention it today. What if Japan embraced Islam? It sounds unbelievable. After all, when people think of Japan, they picture Shinto shrines, Buddhist temples, cherry blossoms, samurai, and cutting-edge technology, not mosques or the call to prayer. Yet in the early 20th century, influential politicians, military strategists, and scholars seriously explored closer ties with the Islamic world. Some believed Islam could become one of Japan's greatest diplomatic weapons. Others wondered whether winning the trust of millions of Muslims across Asia could transform Japan into the undisputed leader of the East. So, why didn't it happen? Why did Japan, a country famous for adopting ideas from around the world, ultimately stop short of embracing one of the world's fastest-growing religions? The answer isn't simply because Japan wasn't interested. In fact, for a time, Japan was very interested. To understand why, we need to go back to a country that had already learned a painful lesson about foreign religions. In the 1500s, Christian missionaries arrived in Japan with Bibles in one hand and the backing of powerful European empires not far behind. Thousands of Japanese converted, including influential lords. At first, this seemed harmless, but the Japanese leadership began to fear that religion wasn't arriving alone. Where missionaries went, merchants often followed. Where merchants settled, soldiers sometimes appeared.
The couplet contributions.
Across Asia, European empires were expanding with astonishing speed. Entire kingdoms fell under foreign control. To Japan's rulers, Christianity no longer looked like a faith alone. It looked like the first step toward colonization. The response was ruthless. Christianity was outlawed. Missionaries were expelled. Believers were hunted down. For more than 2 centuries, Japan sealed itself off from much of the outside world, determined that no foreign power would dictate its future. That long isolation shaped the country's mindset. When American warships forced Japan to reopen in the 1850s, the nation faced a terrifying choice: adapt or become another victim of Western imperialism. Japan chose adaptation. In one of history's fastest transformations, it rebuilt its military, modernized its industries, reformed its government, and studied the technology of Europe with astonishing speed. Within a single generation, Japan had gone from a feudal society to one of the world's rising industrial powers. Then came the moment that stunned the world. In 1905, Japan defeated the mighty Russian Empire. For the first time in the modern era, an Asian nation had crushed a major European power in war. Across Asia and the Middle East, people celebrated. If Japan could defeat a European empire, perhaps Western domination wasn't inevitable after all. Muslim intellectuals from India to the Ottoman Empire began paying close attention. Newspapers praised Japan as proof that an Asian nation could modernize without completely surrendering its identity. Japan noticed this admiration. Its leaders realized something important. Respect could become influence, and influence could become power. Around the same time, Japan's ambitions were growing. It wasn't satisfied with defending its islands anymore. It wanted an empire stretching across Asia. But there was a challenge. Many of the regions Japan hoped to influence, or eventually control, were home to millions of Muslims. From Central Asia to Western China, and throughout Southeast Asia, Islam united people across languages, borders, and cultures. Military force alone could occupy territory. It couldn't win hearts. Some Japanese strategists began asking a question that sounded almost impossible. What if Japan became the friend and even the protector of the Muslim world? It was an audacious idea. Instead of presenting itself as another conqueror, Japan could claim to be the Asian power standing against European colonial empires. If Muslim communities believed that message, Japan might gain allies without firing a shot. At first, it was only a theory discussed in intellectual circles. But before long, the Japanese government started taking the idea far more seriously than almost anyone today realizes. And that's where the story takes an unexpected turn. By the 1920s, the conversation had moved far beyond academic curiosity. Japan wasn't simply reading about Islam anymore. It was studying it, funding research into it, and quietly weaving it into its foreign policy. Government officials, military officers, and influential scholars believed that understanding Islam could unlock doors across Asia that armies alone never could. The logic was surprisingly simple. European empires had ruled millions of Muslims for decades, but they were still viewed as foreign occupiers. Japan, on the other hand, was an Asian nation. If it could present itself as a respectful partner instead of another colonial master, perhaps Muslim communities would welcome its leadership. So Japan began making careful moves. Delegations traveled to meet Muslim leaders. Scholars translated the Quran into Japanese. Universities expanded research on Islamic history and culture. Newspapers published articles explaining Islamic beliefs to Japanese readers. Then came another symbolic step. Mosques began appearing in Japan. The most famous was the Kobe Mosque, completed in 1935. It became a visible sign that Japan was willing to recognize Islam in a way that few people would have expected. To outsiders, it looked as though Japan was opening its doors to the Muslim world. But appearances can be deceiving. Behind the scenes, the government's interest wasn't driven by a sudden religious awakening. It was driven by strategy. Every new relationship with Muslim leaders strengthened Japan's influence across regions where European powers were deeply unpopular. The timing wasn't a coincidence. Japan's military expansion was accelerating. It had already occupied Manchuria and was pushing deeper into China. As the empire grew, so did the number of Muslims living under or near Japanese control. Winning their trust became a strategic priority. Japanese propaganda began describing the country as the champion of Asia. It claimed Japan wasn't building an empire like Britain or France. Instead, it said Japan was liberating Asian peoples from Western domination. For some, the message was persuasive. For others, it rang hollow. Because while Tokyo spoke about unity, many people living under Japanese occupation experienced censorship, forced labor, and military brutality. That contradiction became impossible to ignore. It's difficult to convince people you're bringing freedom when soldiers are standing in their streets. Still, the fascination with Islam continued. Some influential thinkers made an astonishing proposal. What if the emperor himself converted to Islam? There is no evidence that the emperor ever considered doing so, and no official plan came close to becoming reality. But the fact that respected intellectuals could even discuss such an idea reveals just how seriously Japan viewed the geopolitical importance of the Muslim world. The proposal wasn't really about faith. It was about symbolism. If the emperor embraced Islam, supporters believed millions of Muslims might see Japan as the natural leader of Asia. It was one of the boldest geopolitical ideas of the 20th century. But it rested on a dangerous assumption: that people could separate religious symbolism from political reality. They couldn't. Across Asia, Muslims watched what Japan was doing, not just what it was saying. And the gap between those two stories kept getting wider. If you're enjoying uncovering these forgotten chapters of history, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It helps the channel keep bringing you the hidden stories that shaped our world. As the 1930s drew to a close, Japan faced a harsh reality. Diplomacy could open doors. Propaganda could shape opinions, but neither could erase the consequences of war. The dream of becoming the trusted protector of the Muslim world was beginning to collide with the realities of an expanding empire. And once that happened, Japan's remarkable flirtation with Islam began to unravel. By the early 1940s, Japan had reached the height of its power. Its empire stretched across vast parts of Asia. From the outside, it looked unstoppable. But beneath the surface, the grand strategy was beginning to crack. The dream had been ambitious: unite Asia under Japanese leadership. earn the trust of Muslim communities, and replace the European empires that had dominated the region for centuries. Instead, the war was producing a very different reality. Where Japan had hoped to be seen as a liberator, many people experienced occupation. Where it promised partnership, many witnessed harsh military rule. The contradiction was impossible to hide, and no amount of diplomacy could erase it. But military policy wasn't the only obstacle. Japan also faced a question that went far deeper than politics. What did it mean to be Japanese? Unlike many religions that had spread through conquest or missionary work, Japan's spiritual traditions had evolved over centuries alongside its culture. Shinto wasn't simply a religion. It was woven into national identity, imperial ceremonies, seasonal festivals, and the very story of Japan's origins. Buddhism, which had arrived centuries earlier, had gradually blended with Japanese life instead of replacing it. Most people saw no conflict in visiting both a Buddhist temple and a Shinto shrine during different moments of their lives. Islam, however, asked something fundamentally different. It called for exclusive devotion to one God. For individuals, conversion was certainly possible. But for the Japanese state, embracing Islam would have required redefining the ideological foundations of the nation itself. That was a price its leaders were never willing to pay. The emperor stood at the center of this dilemma. Before the end of World War II, the emperor was regarded as more than a constitutional ruler. He occupied a sacred place within Japan's national mythology, linking the state to ancient traditions. A formal conversion to Islam, or any other exclusive faith, would have raised questions that reached far beyond religion. It would have challenged the very narrative upon which modern Japan had built its unity. In the end, strategy collided with identity, and identity won. Then history delivered its final verdict. World War II ended in disaster for Japan. Its cities were devastated. Its empire disappeared almost overnight. Following the surrender in 1945, Japan underwent sweeping political reforms. The military lost its dominant role in government. State-sponsored nationalism was dismantled. The emperor publicly renounced his divine status, and a new constitution guaranteed freedom of religion. Suddenly, there was no longer any geopolitical reason to cultivate Islam as an instrument of empire. The strategy that had once seemed so promising simply faded away. Today, Japan is home to a small but growing Muslim community made up of immigrants, international students, Japanese converts, and families who have built lives there over the past several decades. Mosques stand in cities that, a century ago, had barely encountered Islam at all. Visitors can hear the call to prayer in places where earlier generations could scarcely have imagined it. Yet Japan never became the Muslim nation that a handful of influential thinkers once envisioned. Not because Islam was rejected as an enemy, not because the two cultures were destined to clash, but because Japan's leaders viewed religion through the lens of national identity and political necessity. They admired Islam's ability to unite people across continents. They respected its influence throughout Asia. They even explored how it might strengthen Japan's position in the world. But admiration is not the same as adoption. History is filled with moments that almost happened. Plans that reached the highest levels of government before quietly disappearing. Ideas that, had they succeeded, might have reshaped entire civilizations. Japan's brief fascination with Islam is one of those forgotten crossroads. It reminds us that history is never inevitable. The world we know today was shaped not only by the decisions nations made, but also by the extraordinary choices they considered, and ultimately left behind. And perhaps that's the greatest surprise of all. Sometimes the most fascinating chapters of history aren't the ones that change the world. They're the ones that came astonishingly close.